Hi, I'm Patty Harms, and I'm a professor at Kenan-Flagler Business School, and I'm here with Chris Karras today, and we're going to be talking about his undergraduate honors thesis. Chris, can you introduce yourself and also tell us about your research question?
Absolutely. I'm Chris Karras. I'm a senior graduating student at UNC Chapel Hill studying business administration at Kenan-Flagler Business School. I'm a part of the Kenan Scholars Program there at Kenan-Flagler. And over the past year, I really had the pleasure to work with Dr. Harms and a lot of other great individuals to study the impact of different marketing message on consumers' perception of sustainable sportswear.
So you'll have to help me out, even though I've been with you and studying this for a long time. What is sustainable sportswear?
Yeah, absolutely. I actually have a slide I'd like to share with you real quick. It kind of
Okay.
gives a little bit of visual representation of what I mean by sustainable sportswear. And sustainable sportswear can you see this?
Yes, yes.
Awesome, wonderful. So sustainable sportswear can take a lot of different approaches. Really, ultimately, what I mean by sustainable sportswear are sportswear products. So products that are typically utilized for athletic performance, but really in the market that we're in today, sportswear is invading all aspects of life. Athleisure is a huge trend where people are wearing these types of clothing that maybe were initially created for athletic activity, but in their day-to-day life. And I'm a perfect example of that with the shirt I'm wearing today. But sportswear, and what I mean by green or sustainable sportswear here, are products that are specifically built and constructed, typically through material innovation, to introduce some type of sustainable or green element into the product. So here are some great examples of what's happening in the market right now from 4 different brands. Nike with their Space Hippie line. I'll just give a really brief, quick synopsis on what's happening here with these different brands. Nike is actually, and this was so cool because during my research, while I was actually writing some of this paper, Nike, they launched news of this new Space Hippie line, which I thought was the coolest thing ever. But they're utilizing factory waste from all of their from all of their manufacturing across their value chain to utilize that waste, something that would typically just fall to the factory floor, to create new products. So it's part of this waste reduction, circular product lifestyle idea that I think is so cool. Adidas, they're really, like I mentioned, they were at the base and the foundation of this sustainable sportswear movement, and they're creating the first fully recyclable sportswear and really athletic piece of footwear. And this piece of footwear is called the Adidas Futurecraft Loop. And ultimately, the goal of the shoe is to be worn to life by a single user and then ground up and the materials are completely reutilized to create a new product. Puma, in their first mile collaboration, is utilizing plastic waste and creating material innovation that can build different pieces of sportswear. And they have a whole athletic wear line around their first mile collaboration. And lastly, a super cool innovation, the Reebok Forever Float Like Grow, which is the first plant-based performance running shoe on the market. It has an algae sock liner. It has Castrol bean midsole. It has some really cool stuff. So this is what I mean by sustainable sportswear, these products that are specifically utilizing sustainability as an element of the product.
That's great. Okay, so I'm going to ask you, Chris, and like really succinctly, tell me your research question one more time before we dive into any more details.
Absolutely. So in the most succinct way, it's what are the impact of different marketing messages on consumers' perceptions of sportswear product and brand?
Okay, all right. So can you describe the structure of your study?
Absolutely. And I'll once again rely on some slides here to provide a little bit of a visual assistance. Let's see here. So my study, and here's kind of, I haven't mentioned yet this combination of brand and claim, but from a very high level standpoint, my study utilized a survey instrument, a survey methodology, specifically a consumer perception survey and an experimental consumer perception survey to understand what real consumers thought about this combination of brand and claim. My study really revolves around brand and claim type. And I utilized 4 different brands, and ultimately these 2 variables were kind of combined into stimulus advertisements, which I created and were shown to consumers or shown to respondents in my survey. So I utilized 4 different brands: Nike, Adidas, Puma, and Reebok. They represent some of the traditional high-level players in the market. They really actually all fall into the top 10 brand values as far as sportswear brands go, and sports brands in general, and then claim type. And so claim type is very key. It's an instrumental element of my study, and ultimately I ended up using 3 claim types. So kind of understanding a little bit more about what claim type is. If you saw an advertisement, for instance, for a new pair of shoes, sneakers, and you saw, of course, what you're going to see on there. You're probably going to see the product. You're going to see the brand. The brand's going to be on there, and that's where I pulled in my element of brand here. But you're also probably going to see some verbiage, some claims, some marketing messages there that make you interested in the product, that make you want to buy the product. And so what I did was I kind of sat back and said, what are some different types of claims that can be utilized for this sustainable sportswear, specifically for this sustainable sportswear type? And I actually went to the market and started looking. And a lot of this research was actually, it started with the Adidas times Parlay collaboration in 2015, a long time ago, at the beginning of my collegiate career. I actually saw a couple advertisements for that new Parlay times Adidas collaboration that was coming out on their Ultra Boost. And I was really surprised because I actually saw Adidas using what I would consider a utilitarian claim type on their sustainable product offering stimulus advertisement or marketing advertisement. And I was curious. I said, why would Adidas create this new differentiated green product? And then when they're pushing out advertisements to consumers, they're not even mentioning, in some cases, the sustainable nature of that product at all. So that's kind of what this first claim type I have here utilizes, that type of approach, a utilitarian claim, specifically speaking to what the product does for the consumer. And that claim type was created actually by going and looking at on different websites, Nike, Adidas, Reebok, and Puma, what kind of words and verbiage they commonly utilize, ultimately for the piece of sportswear that I utilized in my stimulus advertisement, which can be seen on the website right underneath this video in a black t-shirt. So I utilized some of those claim types. And then I said, okay, we have a piece of sustainable sportswear. How can we mention this sustainable nature of that sportswear and utilize that as a key component of kind of not manipulating, but encouraging consumers to purchase this product? And so I read a fascinating paper discussing sustainable messaging in sustainable marketing. It was actually in the Journal of Marketing. And it talked a little bit about the difference between assertive and gentle claim types. And here I wanted to introduce that idea of assertive versus gentle. And I did that through enlisting a focus group of 30 individuals online, friends, family, that were able to kind of give me a little bit of feedback on this, what I call the should-can differentiation. So you'll see in the sustainable assertive claim, you should make an environmental difference made with 100% recycled plastic, versus in the gentle claim, you can make an environmental difference made with 100% recycled plastic. And so this is what I call the should-can differentiation, the assertive gentle differentiation. And so what I was curious as, if we're gonna introduce the sustainable version of this, the sustainable claim around this product made with 100% recycled plastic, then what's more impactful? Me telling you should do something, or that you can do something? And so ultimately, all of these things were included in my survey through the use of those stimulus advertisements, which were randomly shown to individuals, and followed by a series of questions that got at this list of variables over here on the right-hand side.
Great. Wow, that's a lot of information.
Yeah,
Even
absolutely.
when I've heard about it before, I always think it's a lot of information. It's so fascinating. So, and you surveyed a number of people. Chris, how many did you end up having on your survey?
Yeah,
600?
so yeah, it was around 621 actually, somewhere in that range. And ultimately I was able to utilize Qualtrics data distribution, or their panel distribution service, which was really phenomenal. And I was able to get this experimental survey out, and they did a great job at helping me randomize those stimulus ads. So ultimately there were 12 stimulus advertisements that were standardized, but also they had different brands and different claims. So kind of what I was just talking about there. They rotated through those different brands and different claims, and they did a great job of helping randomize those so that we got representative subgroups. So I had 12 stimulus advertisements, and in each of those 12 had 50 randomly selected individuals that received that advertisement. So I was able to basically look at these different random experimental groups, which was really cool.
That is amazing. Okay, So what did you find?
Yeah, so this is the fun part, right? It's a little bit, I think that all that information gets boiled down into something really understandable here in the results. So I utilize analysis of variance, which is a statistical technique, and it's a little bit less important maybe what it is and more important how it helped me find my results. So once again, I'm going to share another one of these slides to discuss a couple of these cool statistically significant findings. So this was one of the first statistically significant findings that I was able to reveal utilizing that statistical tool. And ultimately what this graph here shows is that assertive sustainable claims and gentle sustainable claims, regardless of brand type, so stripping the impact of brand away, these claims, sustainable claim types, actually negatively impacted consumers' perception of sportswear product quality. So specifically within the context of my research and the product that I showed on my stimulus advertisements, which was a black athletic shirt, on average, sustainable claims actually produced a lower perception of product quality than utilitarian claims, or that product claim that talks about maybe traditionally what you think sportswear would show. And this finding was really interesting, and maybe even kind of brings me all the way back to in 2015 when I first saw that advertisement that Adidas used that utilized a utilitarian claim. I don't know if Adidas had this insight, but they were doing something maybe right that if they did or did not know, I'm not sure. But if pushing product quality is a measure that you're attempting to achieve as a marketer for sustainable sportswear, it looks like utilitarian claims do that the most effectively. And one of my kind of hypotheses here is that traditionally, and this is something that's developed in the literature a lot, is that traditionally certain industries have a very specific association with them. And sportswear holds sometimes a utilitarian association. Like I said, we're starting to see this merge of athleisure and this new kind of opening up of sportswear in everyday life. But traditionally, it's used for athletic wear and athletic use. And that's a very utilitarian use. So that's one of my hypotheses, maybe as to why we're seeing utilitarian claims drive product quality in comparison to sustainable claims. This also interacts very interestingly with something that's developed in the literature. Actually, in this Newman et al. Article talked about the perceptions of product quality and what's called a sustainable trade-off. Often consumers will think, rightfully or not, that in order for a product to be made greener, something else had to be sacrificed. Some other element of product quality had to be sacrificed. And so this was a really interesting finding. Another really interesting finding, this was actually my personal favorite, and I think is so interesting and has a lot of implications for sustainable sportswear success, something that I'm really invested in, was assertive claims' negative impact on consumers' willingness to recommend a product. So following that experimental display of one of those advertisements, consumers were asked a question: how likely would you be to recommend this product to a friend? And so here in that question, I think it's very important to note the idea of a friend. We see in the results of between group analysis of variance here that assertive claims negatively impact mean willingness to recommend in comparison to utilitarian claims. And there's a statistically significant difference between those two groups. So this all rotates back around to the idea of, should I tell you to do something? And ultimately the title of my paper, Should You, Should Others, is talking specifically to one of these findings: should I, should you? And this finding kind of shows that I shouldn't, should you. And assertive claims negatively impact this post-consumption activity. And in retail, consumer-to-consumer recommendation, word-of-mouth marketing is huge. And so I think it's really interesting to see here that assertive claim types negatively impact consumers' willingness to recommend. And my personal hypothesis here is that ultimately there is some inherent riskiness that's added. There's already kind of a riskiness when I recommend something to a friend. That recommendation is a reflection of me in some way, shape, or form. And when this assertive claim maybe hits me a little bit the wrong way, there's an added riskiness in providing that recommendation to a friend. In combination with one of the other findings that I had, I did not find a statistically significant difference in willingness to buy between claim type, although it was very close, and assertive claims negatively impacting that. But ultimately, willingness to buy was not affected while willingness to recommend was. So these are just two examples of some of the really interesting findings that I had. Ultimately, I used multivariate analysis of variance as well to kind of look at the linear combination of all of these variables, and they supported these findings that I had. So those were two of my personal favorite findings from this research.
That's wonderful. Okay, Chris, what's the big takeaway for people in the field?
Absolutely. So I think there's a couple things for marketers that I really want to push. One of the goals of this research was to provide best practices for marketers. Sustainable sportswear is new. I just mentioned Nike just launched, well, they haven't even launched their Nike Space Hippie line, but they just announced it while I was doing this research. That's happening with all those other brands as well. So it's a new thing. And we're seeing this movement from marketing 2.0 principles, or these principles that envelop traditional marketing ideology, towards marketing 3.0 principles that involve sustainability and these type of ideas into what a consumer is actually weighing in their mind as they make purchasing decisions. So I think it's irresponsible and really not appropriate to apply a 2.0 world to the 3.0 world that we're living in. And so that was one of the goals of this research. And as far as for marketers, the first thing I would say is, if product quality and willingness to recommend are two of the variables that you're looking to maximize for your sportswear product, for your sustainable sportswear product, my research shows that utilitarian claims do that better. And I don't think there's anything wrong with using utilitarian claims for sustainable sportswear. I think that our goal here should be to increase the consumption of sustainable sportswear, because I think it does less harm, it does more good, and it does more with less, which is a motto that I really enjoy. And it's breaking us into this new realm of sportswear consumption. And so I think initiating consumption of sustainable sportswear it's positive, and that's best done with utilitarian claims. Second, I think that you have to have a very intimate understanding of your consumers and what they want. I think it's very easy to say this, but sometimes hard to put it into implementation. Consumer behavior and consumer perception is a very flexible and fluid concept, and it changes quite frequently. And so understanding really what your consumers want is extremely valuable. And my results here show in my multivariate analysis of variance that there's an inherent complexity to sustainable sportswear innovation and sustainable sportswear introduction. And it's really found in that combination of all of these variable types that impact a decision down the road for a consumer. And so I really recommend experimentation with consumer base through different marketing concepts, utilizing your website and the large amount of people that come to that website as a platform for experimentation, showing different segments of consumers, different types of advertisement, and seeing how that impacts revenue and profits down the line. And lastly, I would say do not underestimate the impact of one variable in the total picture. As I just mentioned, consumer behavior is a fluid concept, and one variable can very well impact the total picture for consumers. So ultimately, something that I've learned a lot at Kenan-Flagler and that I'm going to take into the workforce with me, rely on this research that's being done by consumers. And I hope my research can kind of initiate some research into that sustainable sportswear space, because it's a pretty sparsely researched area. But I think rely on the literature that's out there that's being done by these amazing researchers, because utilizing that research to make evidence-based decision-making is much better than just random guesswork or applying kind of those 2.0 principles to the 3.0 world that we're living in.
That's great. Thank you so much, Chris.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.